Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Red Gaming Telecom video we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. We're going to be starting things off with the PlayStation 5. Specifically, that we will not be seeing the next generation of PlayStation until the year 2020, at least according to multiple sources. Then we're going to move over to AMD's Vega, where whispers in the wind are telling us that we will certainly not be seeing a 7nm version of Vega for gaming. Instead, we're going to have to wait for Navi. And then finally, we'll finish the video off with the 8-core Intel SKUs, which apparently will be the norm for Intel's upcoming mainstream CPUs, but we'll once again start things out with the PlayStation 5. So a few days ago, there was a report posted on Semi-Accurate, and they told us that the next generation of PlayStation would possibly be released in 2018, possibly slightly later at 2019, but developers already had their hands on development kits, and we would be seeing a Zen-based, Navi-based APU for the PS5's specifications. However, this does not seem to be the case. In fact, multiple sources have spoken to Kotaku, and they are saying that it's very unlikely we're going to be seeing the system launched in 2019. In fact, one developer was essentially laughing at the notion we would be seeing it before 2019, saying, well, no, the system would enter production. This is kind of what I was saying myself. Like, I would have thought that there would be way more rumours by now. If you look at the PS4 and the Xbox One before they were launched, you can see the ramp up of rumours. Of course, the PS4 at the time was known as Orbis, and we heard a lot of leaks about the specifications of the system. We knew it was going to be AMD based, and then eventually we learned it was going to have Jaguar, and we learned about the GCN, it was going to have GDDR5, and blah 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 blah. And that happened over a period of several months, in fact over a year. So, according to various studios, it's going to be 2020, and this is not only just like random studios as well, some dude who's making an indie game in his bedroom, not being mean, but I'm just saying, these are even Sony's own first-party employees, and they've not been briefed on the existence of the PlayStation 5. Now, there's probably a couple of reasons for that. One, Sony obviously wanted to keep the lid on things as much as possible. They don't want people to say, or rather Microsoft to say, oh, look, Sony are developing this system that's got 16 gigabytes of RAM and this amount of teraflops of computing performance and based upon this specific architecture. Instead, they are probably keeping it to the bare minimum number of people who need to know. The second thing is the development kits themselves are not really development kits, as in, an actual physical box that you would associate with a console. Instead, it's probably going to be much more PC-like, and those PCs are going to be assembled around a target specification. And this is something we've discussed multiple times before. The last thing I want to discuss on this, and this one is quite interesting, according to Kotaku, the PlayStation 5 will be a full-blown next-generation console. So this will not, just to clarify, this will mean that a PS4 game, a PS5 game will not run on a PS4 or a PS4 Pro. So there'll be a hardcore delimitation there. This is a bit different to what Albert Pinello from Microsoft has said. He said that there might be forward compatibility with the Xbox One X. So how that works is a bit of a mystery, but one would assume that, let's say, Gears of War 5 was targeting on the next Xbox, we'll just call it the Xbox 2 for the sake of this video, it would possibly run on the Xbox One X, but with possibly lower resolution, lower frame rate, lower graphical settings, but most likely it would not run on a base model Xbox One. So what are my thoughts on this? Honestly, I'm kind of leaning towards Kotaku. I've not got sources who have spoken on this myself, but just logically speaking, the fact of the matter is, if they are using Navi, and this is something I said in my original video, Navi's just not far along enough in development yet for me to feel confident that it's going to be released yet. And if it is based on 7nm, like the desktop versions of Navi, well, that's even more unlikely because Microsoft and, well, assuming Microsoft use AMD as, their vendor of choice, and of course Sony will definitely want high yields, because high yields means that they've got, well, lower costs. And obviously lower costs when it comes to producing consoles is a good thing. A customer ultimately at the end of the day is more likely to drop $300 on a system than $400 on a system, because one in every two APUs is broken. So Unfortunately, Semi-Accurate have put their article behind a paywall, and it's not like a $3 paywall anyway. It's like a $1,000 paywall because that's a subscription level service. So, it's down to you who you want to believe on this one. Anyway, moving on, and this one we're going to be discussing the 7nm gaming Vega rumors. Now, this is according to Fudzilla, and according to Fudzilla, they believe that 7nm Vega is not currently on any AMD gaming GPU roadmap. It is exclusively going to be designed around the idea of artificial intelligence and that type of thing. And that does make an awful lot of sense. Now, that's not to say that necessarily it will never emerge, but according to Fudzilla, they believe that Navi is going to be the next GPU for gaming. Navi is going to be 7nm still, but it's not going to emerge until something along the lines of 2019. So it's a bit curious really how all of this is going to play out. From a personal perspective, we've heard of course, the RX 500X series, which we've now learned is not going to be any changes in architecture at all. It's essentially going to just be a rebrand for OEMs, and there are some SKUs apparently which have higher clock speeds, but that's a bit ambiguous at the moment. So AMD, being really blunt with you, if Nvidia were to put out Turing or whatever the hell it's going to be called, they don't have anything to necessarily counter. So they've got one of two choices. One, well, they just lower the price of their, well, I suppose they've got three choices, but one of them's not particularly a great one. So the first one is to lower the price of the RX 500 series really just as much as they can. But that basically means Vega is dead on the water. Because if you think about it, the reason Vega is so expensive right now, and this is the reason that Fudzilla don't believe that there's going to be a 7nm gaming variant, according to their sources and whatever they've dug up, is HBM is the reason that Vega is still so prohibitively expensive, or one of the reasons, and one of the reasons you won't see 7nm. So I've got a couple of theories. One, we're just going to see AMD essentially just say, you know what, we're out of the gaming market, which would be kind of dangerous. The second option is they just lower the price of the 500 series, or they do release new 500 series like the 590, but it has a larger number of compute units, possibly with some Vega bits in it. But unfortunately, that's just not been on any of the roadmaps. So it would be disingenuous for me to say that that's even a rumor. It's a slight possibility, and it's not on any of AMD's roadmaps. So how AMD responds with Volta, which could, or once again Turing, or whatever we end up seeing, and that we assume would be built around ray tracing, which we've discussed at length on the channel. There is how does ray tracing work, by the way. That video you can find on the channel. You can search for Red Gaming Tech ray tracing, and that will pop right up. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens between now and 2019. With the launch of Coffee Lake, and specifically the 8700K and the 8600K, we saw Intel essentially torpedo its strategy for the previous generation mainstream processors. Beforehand, 4 cores and 8 threads were the standard, with the 7700K, the 6700K, and of course the previous generations. But it's hard to argue that Intel felt a lot of pressure with the launch of Ryzen, and now of course we're seeing the Ryzen 2000 series pretty much the cusp of being launched. Yes, they're not a true next generation. The best way of describing them really would be Kaby Lake versus Kaby Lake versus Skylake. Yes, there are some definite improvements here and there, but they're not a true next generation processor. But we've heard an awful lot of rumors that Intel will indeed be launching an 8-core, 16-thread chip, which, at least in marketing terms, sounds a lot better to put up an 8-core, 16-thread chip of your own versus a 6-core, 12-thread chip versus, of course, AMD's Ryzen parts. Now, there is a very well-known leaker, and they are known as Eurocom. They produce notebooks and portable workstations, and on their support forums, they've been notorious in leaking stuff they probably shouldn't, or at least being a little more open with stuff that they shouldn't. And they were one of the first sources that told us that the Z390 Express chipset was a thing, and it was preparing to increase the CPU core count, on its mainstream desktop parts. And this was supposedly going to take place in before 2019 or around the 2019 point. But now we have another post from the Eurocom's support. And what they've said is that it will be a new motherboard with a Z390 chipset that would support both 8th generation 6-core, such as the 8700K, and the new 9th generation 8-core 16-thread processors. So what does that mean? Well, it looks like this confirms a couple of things. One, that the Z390 Express ecosystem will be back with the compatible, which is really good news. The second thing it confirms is that this will most likely be, at least according to these rumours, Ice Lake. So Ice Lake will be 8 physical cores, and it will have, once again, 16 threads available. Now this is going to be really interesting because, think about this, this could mean trickle-down economics. Like, what would an i5 part be? Would it be, let's say, 8 cores, 8 threads, or would it be 6 cores, 12 threads? Or perhaps they would have a distinct mixture of different SKUs. And even an i3, like an i3, for example, could be a 4-core, 8-thread part, or it could be a 6-core, 6-thread part. In other words, it's not just going to be the high end which necessarily benefits here. It could be the entire gamut of Intel's processors. This, of course, does mean a couple of questions. What's going to happen with AMD? Well, this year it looks like AMD and Intel are going to be fairly level in terms of the playing field, at least for the next several months. You've got Zen Plus, which has definitely some improvements. It's got higher clock speeds, slightly lower latencies, and a few other bits and bobs, but yeah, Intel still has a single thread performance advantage simply because of the massive clock speed disparity between the two. But next year, all bets are off. AMD have a couple of options. The first is Zen 2, in theory at least, and this is just a pure theory. They could ramp up the core count for some processors. Whether that happens or not, well, some people are saying it's possible. AMD do have this, more core meme, but more realistically, we could just see higher clock speeds and perhaps improvements further still in IPC. But if they didn't increase the core count, that would mean that the only advantage or disadvantage that people would be noticing them for now would just be raw IPC, because they have the same number of cores, therefore they don't have the core advantage, therefore they literally would just be competing at Intel with the same number of cores, the same number of threads, therefore it's just clock speed and IPC, which ultimately give one company a disadvantage or an advantage. So it's going to be very interesting. Does that mean that you should not buy an 8700K right now? Well, my personal opinion, and this is something I've been discussing at length actually with multiple people right now, buying for the future is an actual pain in the ass. Like, you could buy the 8700K and you would be absolutely fine, or you could buy an 8700K and an Ice Lake processor could launch tomorrow. Simultaneously, you could wait for Ice Lake, you could buy the Z390, and it could have only PCIe 3 at launch, and then 3 weeks later, Intel are like, oh, by the way, there's a Z391, and that's got like PCIe 4 native. And obviously I'm just kind of being hyperbolic here, and I'm just saying that if you want something and it's not going to launch tomorrow, like let's say, a major conference is going to happen, or that a new CPU is going to launch, like I would suggest not buying like a 1700 Ryzen right now, because we all know that the 2000 series is going to launch pretty soon. So unless you get a really good deal on like a 1700 or 1700X or whatever, just don't do it. But if you're thinking, well, there's going to be a launch in the distant future, personally, I would just say get an 8700K or a Zen Plus processor or whatever you want. With all of that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.